There are fates in the grim darkness of the far future that transcend simple death. Fates that strip away dignity, identity, and sanity with methodical cruelty. Among the countless horrors that stalk the galaxy, one stands out for its particular brutality and absurdity in equal measure, falling into the hands of the Orks. Not as a quick kill on the battlefield, not as a trophy to be displayed for a moment before being discarded, but as something else entirely, as property, as livestock, as entertainment, or in the rarest of cases, as something approaching a companion in that vast green tide of violence and chaos that defines Orkish existence. This is not a story of heroic last stands or noble sacrifice. This is the story of what happens after the battle is lost, after the defenses crumble, after the last hope of Imperial rescue fades into the smoke-choked sky. This is the story of survival among beings that should not exist according to any rational understanding of biology or physics. Beings that are part fungus, part animal, all violence. Beings whose technology functions on belief as much as engineering, whose society is held together by nothing more than the simple principle that might makes right, and whose entire purpose for existence seems to be fighting, killing, and laughing about it afterward. To be taken by Orks is to enter a world that operates on logic, so alien, so brutally simple, that it defies everything humans understand about civilization and order. It is to become part of an ecosystem that includes not just the Orks themselves, but their smaller cousins, the Gretchen, the various breeds of squigs that serve as everything from food to lubricant to attack animals, and yes, occasionally humans who have been deemed useful enough to keep alive. At least for now. At least until something more entertaining comes along, or until the Orks simply forget they exist. The galaxy is vast beyond human comprehension. Billions upon billions of souls live and die in service to the God Emperor, their lives measured in sweat and toil and the faint hope that their sacrifice matters in the grand scheme of things. But for those who fall into Ork hands, the scope narrows dramatically. The universe becomes measured in the distance between you and the nearest Ork boot, in the hours between beatings, in the scraps of food that might sustain you for another day, in the slim chance that you might find some value to these green-skinned monsters that outweighs their natural inclination to simply eat you or use you for target practice. This is not a tale of hope. The Imperium teaches that suffering in service to the Emperor is noble, that death in his name is a blessing. But there is nothing noble about being kept alive by creatures who view you as less than they view their own excrement. Nothing blessed about watching your comrades vanish one by one into the cookpot or under the crude knives of pain boys who want to see how long a human can scream before the nerves give out entirely. Nothing redemptive about the slow erosion of everything that made you human, ground away by endless days of terror and degradation, until you can barely remember what it felt like to stand in the light of civilization. Yet humans endure. Against all odds, against every rational calculation of survival, some humans persist in the heart of Ork warbands and settlements, some through sheer animal stubbornness, some through Stockholm Syndrome, so profound that they begin to identify with their captors, some through discovering they have skills the Orks value enough to keep them alive, and some, in the strangest and most disturbing cases, because they actually begin to find a place in that green hell that feels almost like belonging. The Orks themselves would be amused by the terror they inspire, if they bothered to think about it for more than a few seconds before getting distracted by something else to fight. To them, keeping humans around is just another part of the great sprawling chaos of their existence. Sometimes humans are food. Sometimes they're slaves. Sometimes they're just there, occupying space until something more interesting demands attention. The Orks don't philosophize about the morality of captivity because philosophy is for gits who think too much. The Orks simply do what they do. And if you're unlucky enough to be in their path when they do it, well, that's just your lot in life now. What follows is a descent into that world. a journey through the daily reality of human existence among the greenskins, from the moment of capture to the possibilities of escape or death, or the far stranger outcomes that await those who somehow manage to carve out an existence in the shadow of the green tide. It is a story told through the experiences of countless souls who have found themselves in this situation, compiled from Imperial records, interrogation reports of rescued captives, and the few written accounts that survive from those who live to tell their tales. It is a window into one of the galaxy's most surreal horrors, where death might actually be considered a mercy compared to what waits for those who survive. The green tide is vast, and it is hungry, and it is always looking for something new to break. The capture, first contact with the green tide. The attack comes without warning, though in hindsight the signs were always there. The unexplained disappearances of patrol units, the strange fungal growths appearing in previously cleared sectors, the reports of crude glyphs painted on walls in the underhive or the forest clearings. The Orks were coming, but by the time anyone realized it, they were already here, and they brought hell with them. For most humans, the first real encounter with Orks in force is a sensory assault beyond anything training can prepare them for. The smell hits first, an overwhelming combination of fungal spores, machine oil, spent ammunition, and the distinctly organic reek of thousands of unwashed bodies that photosynthesize but still manage to produce odors that would make a corpse starch processing plant seem fragrant by comparison. It is a smell that sears itself into memory, that triggers primal fear responses in the human hindbrain, because nothing that smells like that should be alive, let alone winning the fight. Then comes the sound, the roar of crude engines pushed far beyond any safe operational parameters, the thunder of guns that should not function firing shells that should not explode with such devastating effect. The war cries of thousands of Orks bellowing their enthusiasm for violence in voices that seem to come from the gut rather than the throat. The crash and clatter of their ramshackle vehicles tearing across the battlefield like steel avalanches that somehow hold together through sheer collective belief that they should. The Orks do not advance with the disciplined precision of the Imperial Guard or the cold efficiency of the Astartes. They surge forward like a tide, chaotic and unstoppable, and the noise they make announces their arrival like the herald of the apocalypse. The actual combat is often mercifully brief. Orks are not subtle warriors. They do not employ the kind of strategic finesse that might give defenders time to mount an effective response. They simply attack, throwing themselves at their enemies with enthusiasm that borders on joy, soaking up casualties that would break any human formation and laughing as they come. For the average guardsman or PDF trooper, the battle becomes a nightmare blur of green flesh and crude weapons, and the horrible realization that these creatures are bigger and stronger and more resilient than any training scenario suggested. A Ork boy stands roughly human height, but would tower over most men if they stood straight instead of hunched in their natural aggressive posture. Their muscles are slabs of green iron. Their bones are thick enough to turn aside glancing blows from weapons that would shatter human skeletons. Their enthusiasm for violence is infectious in the worst possible way, spreading panic through defensive lines like a disease. When the line breaks, and it almost always breaks, the killing begins in earnest. Orks are not merciful in victory. They do not take prisoners out of any sense of military protocol or strategic value. They take prisoners because killing everything immediately would end the fun too quickly, and because having some squirming captives around might prove entertaining or useful later. The selection process is entirely arbitrary. Stand in the wrong place when a knob is looking for something to grab, and you might find yourself yanked off your feet and thrown into the back of a truck. Fight too hard and attract attention, and you might be singled out for special treatment, or simply be in a group that the Orks decide is more valuable alive than dead for reasons that make sense only to the green-skinned invaders. The immediate aftermath of capture is chaos incarnate. Orks are not organized captors. They do not line up prisoners and process them through any kind of systematic procedure. They simply grab whatever catches their interest and drag it along with the rest of the loot. Humans find themselves thrown together with other captives, shoved into vehicles or pens, or simply chained together in long lines and forced to march. The wounded are left to tend themselves if their injuries are not immediately fatal. The dead are kicked aside, or occasionally tossed onto growing piles of bodies that will serve various purposes later, none of them pleasant to contemplate. In these first hours, the full horror of the situation begins to sink in. The Orks are not evil in any human sense of the word. They are not motivated by malice or sadism in the way that chaos cultists or dark Eldar might be. They are simply utterly indifferent to human suffering unless that suffering entertains them, and their definition of entertainment runs toward the visceral. Watching a human cry is boring. Watching a human try to crawl away with broken legs while Gretchen poked them with sticks is hilarious. The distinction matters because it means there is no appealing to their better nature or sense of mercy. These concepts do not exist in the Orkish worldview. There is only what is strong and what is weak, what is useful and what is not, what is fun and what is boring. The journey to wherever the Orks are taking their captives is an education in Orkish logistics, which is to say, it is barely controlled chaos held together by shouting and violence. Ork vehicles are mobile death traps, even when they are working as intended. And they are almost never working as intended. Trucks lurch and swerve across terrain, their engines belching black smoke and their frames creaking with every impact. Battle wagons plow through obstacles with indiscriminate violence, crushing anything in their path, including occasionally their own troops. The Orks find this hilarious. The humans packed into these vehicles find it terrifying beyond description, especially when they realize that falling off might actually be better than staying aboard when the inevitable catastrophic mechanical failure occurs. For those forced to march, the experience is no better. Orks are tireless walkers, their fungal biology requiring minimal rest and sustenance compared to human needs. They do not stop to let captives drink or eat or rest. They simply keep moving. And anyone who falls behind gets a boot to encourage them to keep pace or gets left behind for the scavengers. The landscape passes in a blur of exhaustion and pain, and the only mercy is that terror eventually gives way to numb acceptance as the body's survival instincts override everything else. Put one foot in front of the other. Stay upright. Stay alive for one more minute, one more hour, one more day. The destination, when it finally comes into view, is unlike anything in Imperial experience. Ork settlements are not cities in any recognizable sense. They are sprawling agglomerations of scrap and salvage and crude construction that somehow function despite looking like they should collapse under their own weight. Smoke rises from countless forges and workshops. The air is thick with noise and motion, with Orks and Gretchen and squigs moving in patterns that appear random but somehow accomplish work. The smell is worse here, concentrated and inescapable, seeping into clothing and skin until it becomes impossible to remember what clean air tasted like. This is where the real experience of captivity begins. This is where humans learn what it means to exist at the bottom of the most brutally straightforward hierarchy in the galaxy. Understanding your captors, Ork society and psychology. To survive among Orks, one must first understand what Orks are, and that understanding challenges everything humans know about biology, psychology, and the basic rules that govern life. Orks are not simply aliens with different cultural values. They are fundamentally different organisms operating on principles that should not work but somehow do. Creatures of such profound biological and psychological simplicity that they achieve a kind of terrible perfection in their purpose. At the most basic level, Orks are a symbiotic fusion of animal and fungus, a genetic construct created millennia ago by the Old Ones as weapons in wars that predated human civilization by eons. Their bodies contain both animal cells that provide the framework for their physical form and fungal organisms that inhabit their bloodstream and skin, creating a hybrid entity that benefits from both the strengths of animal and plant life. This fungal component is what gives orc blood its distinctive green color, rich in chlorophyll, that allows them to photosynthesize sunlight for additional energy. It is what makes them nearly impossible to kill through conventional means, as their bodies can survive injuries that would be instantly fatal to any human. It is what makes them the most successful species in the galaxy, despite their apparent primitiveness. The implications of this biology are staggering. Orcs do not need extensive supply lines or agricultural infrastructure. They can sustain themselves on minimal resources, drawing energy from sunlight and consuming almost anything organic to supplement their diet. They do not need complex medical facilities because their bodies heal from wounds that would require hours of surgery for humans, simply stitching themselves back together through processes that should not work according to any rational understanding of medicine. Cut off an orc's arm and a sufficiently talented pain boy can just stitch it back on, or attach a different arm, or graft on a mechanical replacement, and the orc will be back to fighting strength within days. Their immune systems do not exist in any recognizable form because the fungal components of their biology simply do not allow for infection or disease in ways that affect them. Even more disturbing is their reproductive cycle. Orcs do not reproduce sexually. They release spores constantly throughout their lives, particularly at the moment of death, and these spores can lie dormant in soil for years or even decades before conditions trigger their growth. When they do grow, they produce the entire orcoid ecosystem in sequence. First come the squigs, the simple symbiotic organisms that will serve various functions in the mature ecosystem. Then the snotlings, the smallest and stupidest of the orcoid species, whose only real function is to cultivate fungus for food. Then the Gretchen, slightly more intelligent than snotlings, but still far below orcs in every measure, who serve as laborers and slaves and cannon fodder. Finally, the orcs themselves emerge, fully formed and already containing within their genetic memory the basic knowledge necessary for survival and warfare. This means that any world touched by orcs is effectively infected permanently. Even if every orc on a planet is killed, their spores remain, and years later, new generations will emerge from the wilderness to plague human settlements anew. It means that orc populations can recover from catastrophic losses with disturbing speed, each new generation as eager for battle as the last. It means that trying to eliminate orcs through conventional military means is like fighting the ocean, destroying one wave only to face another immediately behind it. The psychology that emerges from this biology is equally alien. Orcs are not individuals in the way humans understand individuality. They are more akin to cells in a larger organism, each one genetically programmed with knowledge and instincts that guide their behavior from the moment they emerge from their spore sacs. A young orc, called a youth, knows how to fight and how to use weapons and how to navigate the social hierarchy of his kind without being taught. This knowledge is burned into his DNA, passed down from the ancient brain boys who created the orcs as living weapons. As youths grow and gain experience in battle, they physically change, growing larger and stronger and developing into the specialized roles their genetics predispose them toward. Most orcs become boys, the standard infantry that makes up the bulk of any warband. But some orcs are born as odd boys, individuals whose genetic programming gives them specialized knowledge in specific fields. Mech boys emerge from their spores with intuitive understanding of engineering and technology, able to build vehicles and weapons from scrap through a combination of genetic memory and some kind of psychic connection to the collective orc consciousness. Pain boys have similar innate knowledge of anatomy and surgery, though their understanding is crude and their methods involve more hammering and stitching than anything a human doctor would recognize as medicine. Weird boys are rare orcs who channel the psychic energy generated by their species, wielding it as a weapon, though the process often drives them progressively more insane. Runthards have a talent for managing Gretchen and other lesser orcoids, turning them into marginally useful workers. This genetic specialization means that Orc society functions without need for formal education or training. Every Orc knows its place instinctively and knows what it is supposed to do. The only real variable is size, because Orcs continue to grow throughout their lives in direct proportion to their success in combat and their status within the warband. The biggest Orcs are always the most successful, the most dangerous, the most worthy of respect. This creates a hierarchy that is brutally simple and completely transparent. Might makes right. The strong rule, the weak serve. Any Orc who objects to this arrangement is welcome to challenge someone higher up the ladder, and if they win, they take that position. If they lose, well, at least they went down fighting, which is what Orcs value above all else. At the top of this hierarchy sit the war bosses, Orcs who have grown massive through countless victories and who command through sheer physical dominance and force of personality. A war boss can stand 3 meters tall and weigh half a ton, all muscle and scar tissue and crude bionics, wielding weapons that would crush a human under their weight alone. Below them are the knobs, Orcs who are larger and richer and more aggressive than standard boys, who enforce the war boss's will through liberal application of violence. Knobs are identifiable by their better equipment and their attitude of casual cruelty toward anything smaller than themselves, which includes both lesser Orcs and definitely includes humans. The majority of Orcs organize themselves into mobs based on their preferred fighting style. Shooter boys favor ranged combat, such as it is among Orcs, while slugger boys prefer to get stuck into close combat where they can really enjoy themselves. Burner boys specialize in fire-based weapons and are often mechs in training. Tank busters focus on destroying enemy armor and absolutely love their work. Each mob operates as a semi-independent unit within the larger warband, following orders when it suits them or when a sufficiently large knob is there to enforce obedience, but mostly just doing whatever seems like the most fun at any given moment. Beyond the individual warbands and tribes, Orcs organize themselves into clans, though these are cultural groupings rather than formal political structures. Each clan embodies a particular philosophy of how to wage war. The Goths are obsessed with close combat and physical dominance. The Evil Sons love speed and paint everything red because red makes it go faster. And yes, this actually works because enough Orcs believing something makes it true through their collective psychic field. The Blood Axes are considered sneaky and untrustworthy by other Orcs because they actually employ tactics beyond charge forward and hit things, and they have been known to work with humans on occasion. The Bad Moons are wealthy by Orc standards, their teeth growing faster than other Orcs and thus giving them more currency to spend on flashy weapons and gear. The Death Skulls are obsessed with looting, believing that blue brings good luck and somehow always finding the best salvage on any battlefield. The Snakebites reject advanced technology in favor of older, more traditional ways of war, though traditional for Orcs still involves plenty of violence. Understanding these distinctions matters because it determines how Orcs might treat human captives. A Blood Axe might see value in keeping humans alive to gather intelligence or perform tasks that require more patience than most Orcs possess. A Death Skull might keep humans around to help sort through salvage and identify useful technology. A Bad Moon might see humans as status symbols, proof of successful raids. A Goth probably will not bother with captives at all unless they can be used for fighting practice. The clan culture filters down through the warbands and affects every interaction between Orc and human. But perhaps the most important thing to understand about Orcs is their psychic field, the Wa energy that binds them together and warps reality around them. This is not magic in any traditional sense, but rather a manifestation of collective belief made real through psychic power. When enough Orcs believe something works, it does work, at least partially. Their ramshackle vehicles function because Orcs believe they should function. Their weapons fire because Orcs believe they will fire. Their red vehicles actually do go faster because enough Orcs believe that red ones go faster. This effect is limited, requiring a baseline of actual functionality, but it bridges the gap between what Ork technology should be capable of and what it actually accomplishes. For humans trying to survive among Orks, this collective psychic field creates an environment where the normal rules do not apply. Logic fails. Reason is irrelevant. The only law is the law of the strongest, and strength is measured not in cunning or intelligence, but in raw physical power and willingness to use violence. It is a world that operates on the level of a particularly brutal schoolyard, where might makes right and the weak exist only to serve the strong. And humans, no matter how capable they might be by their own species' standards, are weak compared to Orks. This is the fundamental reality that shapes every moment of existence for those taken by the greenskins. You are small, you are fragile, you are only alive because something bigger has not yet decided to kill you, and that can change at any moment, for any reason or no reason at all. The hierarchy of the horde, finding your place. In Ork society, everything has a place, and that place is determined entirely by size and strength. For humans, this creates both opportunities and dangers, because while humans are obviously inferior to Orks in physical terms, they are not the lowest things in the Orkoid hierarchy. That distinction belongs to the Gretchen and Snotlings, the lesser greenskins who serve as slaves and laborers and occasional snacks when food runs short. Understanding where humans fit into this brutal social structure is essential for survival. The absolute bottom of Ork society is occupied by the Snotlings. Tiny fungal creatures, barely larger than a rat, with intelligence to match. Snotlings serve only one real purpose, which is tending the fungus farms that Orks cultivate for food. They are so small and stupid that even Orks barely notice them, except as moving obstacles to step over or kick aside. For a human, the existence of Snotlings means very little, except as a reminder that this ecosystem contains multiple tiers of suffering. One step up are the Gretchen, often called grots, who stand roughly chest height to an average human and are marked by their spindly limbs, hunched posture, and shifty, cowardly demeanor. Gretchen are smarter than Snotlings, but still far below Orks in every measure. They speak a debased version of the Ork language, perform most of the actual labor in Ork settlements, and exist in a state of constant terror of their larger cousins. Orks kick Gretchen for entertainment. They use them as ammunition in specialized weapons. They send them ahead to set off mines or test whether defenses are still active. Gretchen exist to be abused, and they accept this because the alternative is death, and their survival instinct is powerful enough to overcome their minimal dignity. For humans captured by Orks, the relationship with Gretchen is complicated. On one hand, Gretchen represent potential allies, or at least fellow sufferers who understand what it means to live at the mercy of the greenskins. On the other hand, Gretchen are deeply untrustworthy, prone to betrayal if they think it might earn them favor with their Ork masters, or simply because they resent anything that might compete for resources or attention. Some humans form working relationships with Gretchen out of necessity, creating informal partnerships where the grot's knowledge of the camp layout and Ork habits combines with human intelligence to mutual benefit. Other humans are betrayed by Gretchen who see them as currency to trade for better treatment, or simply as entertainment value, reporting escape attempts or theft to the nearest knob. The Gretchen themselves are managed by run-thirds, specialized Orks, who have a talent for herding and controlling the lesser greenskins. Run-thirds carry long prods or whips and are accompanied by squighounds, vicious attack beasts that keep Gretchen in line through fear. For humans, run-thirds represent both a potential source of stability and a significant danger. A run-third who sees humans as just another type of grot to be managed might actually provide a degree of protection from random violence, treating human captives as assets to be preserved rather than disposable entertainment. But that same run-third will have no compunctions about using that whip on humans who step out of line, and the squighounds do not distinguish between Gretchen flesh and human flesh when they bite. Above the Gretchen and run-thirds are the regular boys, the standard orc warriors who make up the majority of any warband. This is where humans interact most frequently with their captors, and where the reality of their situation becomes clearest. To an orc boy, a human is simultaneously pathetic and interesting. Pathetic because humans are so weak and fragile compared to any orc. Interesting because humans do things that orcs find amusing or useful, or just weird enough to be entertaining for a while. An orc boy might keep a human around the way a human child might keep a pet, feeding it scraps and occasionally showing it off to other boys, until the novelty wears off or something breaks and the orc loses interest. The key to surviving interaction with regular boys is understanding their psychology. Orcs respect strength, but they define strength broadly enough that even a human can demonstrate it in ways an orc will recognize. Physical violence against an orc will end badly for the human, but standing up to intimidation without cowering completely can sometimes earn a grudging acknowledgement. Usefulness is even more valuable. An orc who realizes a human can perform tasks that the orc finds boring or difficult might decide that human is worth more alive than dead. This is especially true for humans with technical skills, mechanical aptitude, or the kind of patience for detail work that most orcs completely lack. Knobs occupy the middle tier of orc hierarchy, bigger and meaner than regular boys and armed with better equipment looted from countless battlefields. Knobs enforce the warboss's will and maintain order through liberal application of violence. For humans, knobs represent significant danger because they have the authority to make decisions about captives without consultation. A knob who decides a human would make good target practice or an entertaining opponent in a one-sided fight can simply do it, and no one will question the decision. Conversely, a knob who takes a liking to a particular human for whatever reason can provide protection from lesser orcs, though this protection comes with its own complications. The relationship between humans and knobs often resembles that between a gangster and someone who owes them money. The knob holds absolute power and will exercise it without hesitation if displeased. But as long as the human provides value, continues to entertain, or demonstrates sufficient usefulness, the knob might extend a degree of protection. This creates a dangerous dependency where survival hinges on maintaining that relationship while not angering the volatile and unpredictable knob, who might decide at any moment that a different form of entertainment sounds more interesting. Above the knobs are the odd boys, the specialized orcs, whose genetic programming gives them skills in specific fields. This is where humans can potentially find their most stable positions within orc society, because odd boys value specific kinds of assistance that humans are well suited to provide. Mech boys in particular often find humans useful in their workshops, as human hands are smaller and more dexterous than orc hands, capable of work on fine details that would frustrate even the most talented mech. A mech boy who discovers a human can hold tools, sort parts, or perform repetitive assembly tasks might decide that human is valuable enough to protect from other orcs who want to use them for less productive purposes. Pain boys represent a more disturbing opportunity. These are orcs with innate knowledge of anatomy and surgery, though their methods are crude and their interest in patient comfort is non-existent. Pain boys collect subjects for their experiments, and humans make excellent test subjects because they are complex enough to be interesting but expendable enough that no one cares if the experiments go wrong. However, a human who can demonstrate medical knowledge or surgical skill might become an assistant rather than a test subject, helping the pain boy with procedures that require more finesse than most orcs can muster. This is a precarious position, because pain boys are even more unstable than regular orcs, and their idea of appropriate medical care includes things that would make an inquisitor sick, but it is still preferable to many alternatives. Weird boys are best avoided entirely. These are the orc psychers, who channel the Wa energy of their species, and they are perpetually on the edge of insanity from the psychic pressure building in their heads. Weird boys tend to explode when too much energy accumulates. taking everyone around them with them in spectacular fashion. Humans have no useful role in relation to weird boys and would do well to stay far away from them whenever possible. At the top of the hierarchy sits the war boss, the biggest and baddest orc in the warband, who rules through sheer physical dominance and force of personality. For most humans, the war boss is a distant figure, too important to notice individual captives unless they somehow distinguish themselves dramatically. This is probably for the best, because attracting a war boss's attention can go either very well or very badly with no middle ground. A war boss who finds a human amusing or useful might elevate them to a position of relative safety, but a war boss who decides a human would make a good example to motivate the troops has the authority and inclination to make that happen in the most brutal way possible. The final element of the hierarchy that humans must navigate is the clan culture, which influences how orcs treat captives. Blood axes are the most likely to see value in keeping humans alive, and might even employ them in semi-official capacities as guides or informants. Bad moons might keep humans as status symbols, proof of successful raids and demonstrations of wealth. Death skulls might put humans to work sorting salvage, taking advantage of human ability to identify Imperial technology and assess its value. Freebooters, the piratical orcs who operate outside normal clan structures, sometimes develop the most complex relationships with human captives, occasionally even accepting them as crew members in their ships if the human proves sufficiently useful and adaptable. Finding your place in this hierarchy requires a delicate balance of demonstrating value without threatening any orc's position. Showing strength without challenging anyone to combat you cannot win. And making yourself useful without becoming so indispensable that you attract unwanted attention from higher-ranking orcs who might want to claim you for themselves. It is a constant negotiation with beings who do not think in terms of negotiation. A game where the rules change based on the mood of whoever is biggest, and the penalty for losing is always death or worse. The humans who survive longest in orc captivity are those who learn to read the social dynamics of the warband, who understand which orcs can be approached and which should be avoided, who know when to make themselves visible to demonstrate usefulness and when to disappear into the background to avoid becoming entertainment. They learn the orc language, at least enough to follow orders and understand threats. They learn which Gretchen can be trusted and which will betray them for an extra food ration. They learn the rhythms of the camp, when the orcs are likely to be violent and when they are too drunk on fungus beer to care what the lesser beings around them are doing. They learn, in short, to think like prey in an environment where they will always be prey, and to find what small advantages prey can claim when surrounded by predators. Daily life among the greenskins. The sun rises over the orc settlement, though saying it rises suggests a clear horizon, when in reality the view is blocked by smoke columns from dozens of forges and the skeletal frames of half-built war machines. The air is already thick with noise before dawn fully breaks, the sound of metal on metal as mechs begin their day's work, the roars and curses of orcs waking from sleep and immediately looking for something to fight or break, the squealing of Gretchen being kicked awake by their runthirds. For humans trying to sleep in whatever corner they have claimed or been assigned, these sounds become the alarm clock for another day of survival. Sleep itself is a precious commodity, stolen in fitments between the constant noise and activity of the orc settlement. Orcs themselves sleep far less than humans, their biology requiring only a few hours of rest scattered throughout their day, and they have no concept of enforcing quiet hours for the benefit of weaker species. The settlement operates at full volume around the clock, a perpetual din of industry and violence that never truly stops. Humans learn to sleep through incredible noise, or find themselves chronically exhausted, their bodies ground down by the inability to get proper rest. Some captives develop a kind of exhausted delirium, existing in a state halfway between waking and sleeping, where the boundary blurs into meaninglessness. Food is another constant concern, though the orcs themselves barely think about it. Their photosynthetic biology means they can survive on minimal nutrition, supplementing what they need with whatever they feel like eating. Squigs are the primary food source for most orcs. The eaten squigs bred specifically for consumption. Their flesh, palatable to orc tastes, though it is stringy and barely nutritious for humans. Fungus bread makes up another staple. Thick loaves of cultivated fungus that the snotlings tend and the Gretchen harvest. For humans, these represent the most reliable food sources, though both are acquired tastes at best and potentially toxic at worst, as orc cultivated fungus contains spores and compounds that human digestion was never designed to handle. Human captives learn to eat what they can get, which often means scavenging scraps from orc meals or stealing from Gretchen food stores. The grots are better at keeping track of supplies than the orcs, who simply take what they want when they want it, but Gretchen are also smaller and weaker than humans and can be intimidated into sharing if one is careful not to make enough of a scene that it attracts orc attention. Some humans develop arrangements with Gretchen, trading labor or information for food, creating a black market economy that exists in the spaces between orc awareness. The worst times are when the orcs run low on squigs and fungus both, which happens more often than their haphazard logistics should allow. When orcs get properly hungry, they start looking at anything organic as potential food, and that includes humans. Orcs regularly torture and eat humans when the mood strikes them, sometimes cooking them first, sometimes not bothering with that nicety. The horror of watching a fellow captive dragged to the cookfires is matched only by the horror of realizing you might be next if you do not make yourself scarce or valuable, or at least less convenient than someone else. Cannibalism becomes not a moral question, but a survival calculation. A question of whether hiding is possible or whether demonstrating your value to a mech boy or pain boy might provide protection. The working day, such as it is, varies dramatically based on what role a human has claimed or been assigned. Those attached to mech boy workshops might spend their day sorting scrap, handing tools to the mechs as they work on their latest contraptions, or performing maintenance tasks that require more patience than orcs typically possess. This work is tedious, but relatively safe, as mech boys tend to view their assistants as valuable tools rather than disposable entertainment. The danger comes when a mech's creation malfunctions, as orc technology has a disturbing tendency to explode without warning, and standing too close when a custom mega blaster overheats means being vaporized before you even realize something went wrong. Humans working for pain boys face a different set of challenges. Pain boy workshops are charnel houses where the screaming never quite stops, where orcs are stitched back together from grievous wounds with crude metal plates and liberal use of hammers, where experimental procedures test the limits of orc physiology and occasionally require test subjects of other species. A human assistant to a pain boy spends their day holding patients down during surgery, fetching body parts from the storage piles, cleaning instruments that would make an Imperial Medicae weep, and trying very hard not to think about what happens to the test subjects who do not survive their treatments. The compensation for this nightmare is that pain boys value competent assistants enough to protect them from other orcs, and working in the medical tent provides access to supplies that can be invaluable for treating human injuries and illnesses. Humans assigned to work with Runthod's herd Gretchen, which sounds simple until one experiences the reality of trying to maintain order among creatures who are simultaneously cowardly and treacherous, who will comply when threatened, but plot constantly to avoid work or steal supplies or betray anyone who shows weakness. Managing Gretchen requires a combination of threat and incentive, convincing them that cooperation is less painful than resistance, while also offering small rewards that keep them invested in following orders. The Runthods themselves usually appreciate competent human assistance because it means they can focus on the larger organizational tasks, while the human handles the minute-to-minute management of the grot workforce. This position comes with a squighound for enforcement, which means learning to control a creature that is part attack dog, part horror from nightmares, and wholly indiscriminate about what it bites when ordered to enforce discipline. The most dangerous work assignments are those that involve direct interaction with combat orcs, preparing for battle or returning from it. Helping boys maintain their weapons means being surrounded by creatures who are perpetually aggressive and who see violence as the solution to every problem, including mechanical malfunctions. A human who cannot get a shooter to fire properly might find themselves blamed for the failure, with consequences ranging from a beating to being used as target practice to test if the problem is the weapon or something else. Loading ammunition, maintaining vehicles, sorting loot from raids, these tasks put humans in close proximity to orcs at their most volatile, when the adrenaline of combat is still pumping and any excuse for more violence is welcome. Some humans find themselves assigned to entertainment duties, which are arguably worse than any form of labor. Orcs have a crude sense of humor that runs heavily toward physical comedy, usually at someone else's expense. Being told to perform for orc amusement might mean fighting another human in a mock combat that becomes all too real, or attempting tasks that are designed to be impossible so the orcs can laugh at the failure, or simply being placed in situations where the humor derives from human fear and suffering. The only mercy is that orcs have short attention spans, so even the most elaborate entertainment rarely lasts more than a few hours before they get bored and wander off to find something else to do. Between the work and the terror and the constant noise, there are strange moments of almost normalcy that make captivity even more surreal. Orcs gambling on fights between squigs, with humans sometimes drafted to be referees or bookkeepers. Mechs showing off their latest creations with pride that would be endearing if the creations were not weapons designed to kill as many people as possible. Pain boys explaining their procedures with enthusiasm that suggests they genuinely believe they are helping their patients. Gretchen gossiping about which knobs are about to have disagreements, information that can be valuable for humans trying to stay out of the line of fire. These moments of interaction, where orcs are not actively hostile, create cognitive dissonance, glimpses of personality, and even something approaching companionship, before reality reasserts itself and reminds you that these are the beings who would kill you without hesitation if they got bored or hungry, or simply noticed you standing there looking vulnerable. The nights are marginally better than the days, but only marginally. Orcs do not sleep according to any regular schedule, but they do tend to slow down somewhat after dark, retiring to their quarters or gathering around fires to drink and tell stories of battle. Humans learn to use this time for maintenance of their own bodies and minds, treating injuries that accumulated during the day, washing when water is available, attempting to clean clothing that has become stiff with grime and blood, and other substances better left unidentified. This is also when the psychological weight becomes hardest to bear, when the absence of immediate threat allows the mind to process what has been endured, when memories of life before captivity surface and bring with them the crushing awareness of how far one has fallen. Some humans maintain rituals from their previous lives, quietly reciting prayers to the emperor or performing small ceremonies that connect them to their identity as imperial citizens. These acts of devotion must be done carefully, as orcs generally find human religion amusing but can become hostile if they decide the praying is boring or if a particularly aggressive orc interprets it as a challenge. Other humans abandon their faith entirely, unable to reconcile the teachings of the Imperium with the reality of their situation, finding no comfort in prayers that seem to go unanswered while they rot in alien captivity. The loss of faith is yet another erosion of identity, another piece of what made them human, ground away by the daily brutality of orc society. Through it all runs a current of constant alertness, the prey animal awareness that every human in orc captivity develops. You learn to track the movements of the larger orcs, to identify which ones are drunk on fungus beer and which are just naturally aggressive, to read the subtle signs that indicate a fight is about to break out and position yourself somewhere else before the violence begins. You learn to identify the sounds of different vehicles and weapons, to know when the camp is preparing for a raid and when they are settling in for a period of relative calm. You learn which areas of the settlement are safer and which are effectively death traps where humans should never venture. You learn, in essence, to think like prey, while retaining enough of your humanity to remember that this is not normal, that you are not meant to live this way, that somewhere beyond the smoke and the stench and the constant violence, there is still an Imperium and a galaxy where humans are more than slaves and entertainment for alien monsters. But that galaxy feels very far away when you are curled up in a corner of a mech's workshop, trying to sleep through the sound of blowtorches and orc curses, knowing that tomorrow will bring another day of survival among the greenskins, and hoping that you make it through without becoming the entertainment or the ingredient in someone's next meal. The mech boys and their workshops, a human's potential value. Of all the possible fates that await humans in orc captivity, becoming attached to a mech boy workshop is among the least immediately horrifying, which is not to say it is safe or pleasant, but rather that it provides a measure of structure and purpose that other assignments lack. Mech boys are the engineers and tinkers of orc society, odd boys whose genetic programming gives them intuitive understanding of mechanical principles and an obsessive drive to build things that explode, shoot, or ideally do both. For humans with technical skills, or even just decent hand-eye coordination, mech boy workshops represent potential value that can translate into survival. The workshop itself is a sprawling chaos of scrap metal, half-assembled machines, tools of every description, many looted from Imperial sources, and Gretchen running around on various errands while trying to avoid getting stepped on or used as test subjects. Smoke and sparks fill the air from multiple welding operations happening simultaneously without any apparent coordination. The noise is deafening, a cacophony of hammering and sawing and the shriek of metal being torn apart or forced together through methods that violate every principle of proper engineering. Oil and other fluids pool on the floor, creating slick hazards that claim the unwary, and the whole place smells of hot metal, fuel and ozone from the electrical arcs that leap between components whenever the mechs test their creations. Mech boys themselves are fascinating in their single-minded dedication to their craft. Unlike most orcs who are perfectly content to fight and eat and sleep and repeat, mechs have an additional compulsion that drives them to create. They wake up with visions of weapons and vehicles dancing in their heads, images of technologies they do not fully understand but know they can build if they just get the right parts and apply enough hammering. This knowledge is genetic, inherited from the old ones who created the orcs as living weapons, encoded into their DNA alongside the ability to photosynthesize and the instinct to seek combat. A mech boy has never taken an engineering course or studied technical manuals, but they can look at a pile of scrap and see a functional vehicle, can examine a broken Imperial weapon and understand enough about its principles to recreate it in orky fashion. The reality of orc technology is more complex than most Imperial observers understand. The common wisdom is that orc devices work only because of their collective psychic field. That orc belief makes their ramshackle creations function despite violating every law of physics and engineering. This is partially true, but misleadingly simple. Orc technology actually works on sound principles at its core. A shooter is a functional firearm with recognizable components, including barrel, firing mechanism, and ammunition feed. The problem is that everything is crude, assembled from scrap, and maintained through percussive maintenance rather than proper procedure. This is where the WAR field comes in, not making impossible things possible, but rather bridging the gap between barely functional and actually reliable. When enough orcs believe a weapon will fire, that collective belief provides the psychic push that overcomes the mechanical deficiencies. For humans working in mech workshops, this creates a surreal experience. Half of the work is genuine engineering, sorting parts by size and function, holding pieces in place while the mech welds them together, performing maintenance tasks that keep vehicles operational. The other half is essentially cargo cult mechanics, painting things red because red makes them go faster, and it does when enough orcs believe it. Installing completely non-functional components because they look impressive, and that makes the orcs more confident in the weapon's power, and that confidence feeds the WAG field that makes it actually more powerful. And occasionally just hitting things with a wrench, because the mech believes that will fix the problem, and on some level it does, because belief shapes reality around orcs. The mech's assistant role begins with the simplest tasks. Sorting scrap into categories requires minimal training, but saves the mech from having to dig through piles looking for specific parts. Human hands are smaller and more dexterous than orc hands, making humans better suited for work on fine details, like assembling trigger mechanisms or routing electrical wiring through tight spaces. Humans can also read Imperial technical manuals, a skill that mechs sometimes find useful when they acquire proper equipment and want to understand its function before ripping it apart and rebuilding it to orc standards. These basic contributions earn humans a place in the workshop hierarchy, usually somewhere above the Gretchen, but below the Spanner boys, young orcs who are training to become full mechs. As a human proves their value, additional responsibilities follow. Maintaining inventory of parts and supplies requires literacy and organizational skills that most orcs lack. Recording which projects the mech is working on and what materials they need involves keeping notes that humans can update and reference, but that the mech could never be bothered to maintain themselves. Identifying useful salvage from the piles of loot that accumulate after raids plays to human knowledge of Imperial technology and ability to distinguish between valuable items and worthless scrap. These administrative functions are not glamorous, but they make the workshop run more efficiently, and an efficient workshop produces better weapons and vehicles, which means the mech earns more teeth and respect, which means the mech becomes invested in keeping their human assistant alive and functional. The dangerous side of mech workshop work comes from the inherent instability of orc technology. Mechs test their creations frequently, and these tests often go catastrophically wrong. A new variant of shooter might explode in the user's hands, spraying shrapnel across the workshop and shredding anyone standing too close. A vehicle's engine might detonate when first activated, turning the mech's latest creation into a fireball that consumes several other projects as collateral damage. Force field generators sometimes implode rather than generating protective bubbles, creating zones of warped space that tear apart anything caught in their effect. Humans working in these environments learn to develop a sixth sense for when something is about to go wrong, reading the signs that an experiment is failing and getting to cover before the explosion occurs. The actual creative process of mech work is something between engineering and art and divine inspiration. A mech will receive a commission from a war boss or nob who wants a specific type of weapon or vehicle. The mech will nod and grunt and immediately begin gathering materials, pulling scrap from the piles with seeming randomness, but actually guided by genetic knowledge of what components are needed for the desired result. They will then begin assembling these parts, welding and bolting, and occasionally just jamming pieces together in ways that should not create functional structures, but somehow do. Throughout this process, the mech will be talking to themselves, or to their tools, or to the machine they are building. A running commentary on what they are doing and why, explanations that make perfect sense to them, and absolutely none to anyone else. Human assistants during this creative phase serve primarily as tool handlers and extra sets of hands. Hold this while the mech welds it. Pass that wrench. Go find a hydraulic pump from the pile over there. Fetch a grot to test whether this electric field will electrocute anything that touches it. The work is demanding but also fascinating, watching as a heap of scrap transforms into something that begins to resemble a functional vehicle or weapon system. There is pride to be taken in successful projects, the satisfaction of knowing your contributions helped create something that works, however bizarre the process of its creation. This pride is dangerous because it threatens to create investment in the Ork cause, a form of Stockholm syndrome where humans begin to identify with their captors' successes. Some mechs form genuine attachment to their human assistants, or at least something approaching attachment by Ork standards. A mech who has worked with the same human for months or years becomes accustomed to their presence, develops patterns of communication that approach mutual understanding, begins to think of them as part of the workshop's permanent fixtures, along with the workbenches and tool racks. This does not make the human safe by any means, because Orks are volatile, and even a valued assistant can be sacrificed if the mech needs a test subject or gets angry about a failed project. But it does provide a layer of protection against casual violence from other Orks who might want to claim or harm the human. A mech who tells other Orks to leave his assistant alone will generally be obeyed, as no one wants to anger the specialist who maintains their weapons and vehicles. The workshop also serves as neutral ground of sorts within the warband. Orks come to the mech to commission work or pick up completed projects, and while they are there, they are generally on their best behavior, because even the most aggressive knob understands that angering the mech means getting shoddy work or having your order delayed indefinitely. This makes the workshop relatively safe compared to the rest of the camp, a space where the normal rules of might makes right are temporarily suspended in favor of the transactional relationship between client and craftsman. Humans can move through the workshop with less fear of random violence, though they must still be careful not to get in anyone's way or draw attention from particularly unstable visitors. The intellectual challenge of mech work provides another form of compensation, strange as that seems in such circumstances. Humans who have engineering backgrounds or mechanical aptitude find themselves using skills they thought would never matter again, solving problems that require genuine thought and creativity. How do you explain to a mech that what they are trying to build violates fundamental principles of physics without implying they do not know what they are doing? You do not explain the violation. You focus on finding practical ways to make it work within the constraints of available materials and the wow field that will supplement the design. How do you identify which pieces of looted Imperial equipment can be repurposed for Ork use without giving the Orks weapons that might be turned against humans later? You do not sabotage, obviously, as that leads to quick death, but you can perhaps subtly guide the mech toward projects that are less effective or more likely to malfunction at critical moments. This last consideration brings up the moral dimension of working for mech workshops. Every weapon you help build will be used against Imperial forces. Every vehicle you help maintain will carry Ork boys to raid human worlds. Your skills and labor directly contribute to the Ork war machine, making you complicit in the violence that your species suffers. This reality weighs on some humans more than others, creating internal conflicts that have no good resolution. Refuse to help, and you die. Help too enthusiastically, and you become a traitor to humanity. Walk the middle path, and you become a collaborator who survives by rationalizing their betrayal. The mechs themselves are utterly indifferent to these concerns, caring only whether the work gets done and the machines function. Their simple Orkish morality incapable of comprehending the complex guilt that humans experience in these situations. Yet for all the moral compromise and physical danger, mech workshop work remains one of the better fates available to humans in Ork captivity. The work has meaning beyond mere survival. The relationship with the mech can develop into something approaching mutual respect, even if it never reaches actual friendship. The skills practiced are skills worth having, knowledge that might prove valuable if escape ever becomes possible. And on the practical level, being valuable to a mech means access to tools, materials, and information that can be crucial for survival. A length of cable hidden in your clothing, a small knife fashioned from scrap metal and never discovered in searches, knowledge of the camp layout from delivering materials to different locations. These small advantages accumulate into slightly better odds of making it through another day, another week, another month of captivity among the greenskins. Violence and combat. the constant threat. Violence is the fundamental fact of Ork existence, the baseline state from which all other behaviors deviate briefly before returning. Orks were genetically engineered as weapons, and that engineering did its work too well, creating beings for whom violence is not a means to an end, but the end itself. They do not fight to achieve objectives, though objectives may be achieved through fighting. They fight because fighting is what they do, what they are, what they live for, and eventually die for, with expressions that suggest satisfaction rather than fear. For humans in Ork captivity, understanding this relationship to violence is essential, but does not make it easier to endure. The camp itself is never truly at peace. Even when no raids are planned and no enemies are threatening, Orks find reasons to fight. Disagreements over loot distribution escalate into brawls. Gambling on squig fights turns into fights between the gamblers. Boys practice their combat skills by battering each other with crude weapons or bare fists, enjoying the pain they give and receive in equal measure. The constant background soundtrack includes the meaty impact of fist on flesh, the clash of crude blades on improvised shields, the occasional crack of gunfire when an Ork decides to test their weapon or settle an argument permanently. Humans learn to identify different qualities of violence, to distinguish between playful roughhousing that will blow over quickly and serious conflicts that might escalate into full melees that endanger everyone nearby. When fights break out, humans have limited options, and all of them are bad. Getting involved means probable death, as even the weakest Ork is far stronger than any normal human, and their thick skulls and redundant organs make them nearly impossible to incapacitate through conventional attacks. Trying to break up an Ork fight marks you as either brave or stupid, and Orks rarely bother distinguishing between the two before they turn their aggression on the interloper. The best strategy is usually to make yourself small and invisible, to back away slowly without drawing attention, to find cover and wait for the violence to resolve itself or exhaust the participants. This means sometimes watching Gretchen or other humans get caught in the crossfire and being unable to help, adding another layer of guilt to the psychological burden of captivity. The Orks' relationship to pain is one of the most disturbing aspects of their psychology from a human perspective. Orks feel pain, but they process it entirely differently than humans do. An injury that would send a human into shock makes an Ork angry, and thus more dangerous. The sight of their own blood seems to excite them, triggering increased aggression rather than any kind of preservation instinct. This makes them terrifying opponents, but also creates opportunities for humans observant enough to exploit them. An angry Ork is more dangerous but also more predictable, focused entirely on the source of their rage and less aware of their surroundings. A human who can make an Ork angry enough to focus entirely on them might lead that Ork into a trap or away from other humans who need protection. Though the human running this gambit had better have an escape plan, because an enraged Ork will not stop until their target is dead or they are distracted by something else. Pain boys exploit this high pain tolerance for their medical procedures, which are essentially battlefield surgery performed with minimal anesthetic. Watching a pain boy stitch an Ork back together while the patient bellows curses and occasionally swings at the doctor is both horrifying and darkly comedic. The patient does not want anesthetic because being knocked out means missing the experience of being tough enough to endure the procedure conscious. And the pain boy does not want to waste resources on making the patient comfortable when they are going to survive anyway. Human assistants to pain boys have to develop strong stomachs quickly, learning to hold thrashing patients down while the pain boy works, to hand over tools soaked in alien blood, to ignore the screaming because you will hear it constantly, and if you let it affect you, every time you will break mentally within days. Combat training in Ork warbands is simultaneously brutal and haphazard. There are no drill sergeants running organized exercises or tactical instructors teaching proper technique. Young Orks learn to fight by fighting, throwing themselves at opponents until they develop the skills necessary to survive. The casualties from training are probably higher than from many actual battles, as youths pummel each other without any kind of protective equipment or supervision that might prevent serious injuries. Humans observing this process see waste on a scale that Imperial Guard sergeants would find appalling, but Orks do not care about efficiency or preserve their troops for future battles. Every fight is practice for the next fight, and if you die in practice, you are not tough enough to contribute in real combat anyway. When the warband prepares for actual raids, the camp transforms into barely controlled chaos that makes regular life look peaceful by comparison. Orks bellow challenges to each other, eager to prove they should be in the first wave of attack. Mechs rush to complete last-minute modifications to vehicles and weapons, ignoring safety protocols that did not exist in the first place. Painboys sharpen their tools and check their supplies, knowing they will be busy stitching boys back together after the battle. Gretchen run around trying to stay out from underfoot while completing their various tasks, knowing that errors made during preparation often result in being used as punishment examples, and humans try to determine whether staying in camp or being forced along on the raid represents greater danger, a calculation with no good answer. Raids themselves are experiences of pure primal terror from a human perspective. Ork tactics, such as they are, involve charging at the enemy while shooting everything in the general direction of the target, and trusting that the sheer weight of numbers will overwhelm any defense. This works alarmingly often, particularly against opponents who are not prepared for the psychological impact of thousands of orcs bearing down on them while bellowing war cries that can be heard over the thunder of their weapons. Humans forced to accompany raids typically serve logistical functions, carrying ammunition or maintaining vehicles or providing cover fire with captured weapons, anything that keeps them away from the primary combat but still useful enough to justify their presence. The aftermath of raids is when the true savagery of Ork nature becomes most apparent. Victory celebrations are drunken orgies of violence, where Orks fight each other almost as enthusiastically as they fought the enemy, fueled by fungus beer and the adrenaline of successful combat. Loot is divided according to rules that seem arbitrary to human observers, but make perfect sense to Orks. The biggest Orks take what they want first, and everyone else scrambles for the remnants. Captives taken in the raid are dragged back to camp, joining the existing population of humans and other species in shared misery. And the war stories begin, Orks recounting their exploits with enthusiasm that grows with each retelling, embellishing their achievements until simple fights become epic duels and lucky shots become demonstrations of impossible marksmanship. Defeats are handled differently, but no less violently. A war boss who led his warband to disaster might face challenge from ambitious knobs who think they could do better. These leadership fights are brutal affairs that end only when one participant is dead or so thoroughly beaten they accept the other's dominance. Humans sometimes get caught up in these power struggles, as new leadership often means new organization, and humans associated with the old boss might be seen as liabilities or simply as convenient targets for demonstrating the new boss's authority. Survival during transition periods requires reading the political situation carefully and aligning yourself with whoever seems likely to come out on top, or better yet, finding a way to be valuable to all potential winners. The constant exposure to violence leaves psychological scars that run deeper than any physical injuries. Humans in Ork captivity develop something approaching PTSD, but it manifests differently because the trauma is continuous rather than a single event. There is no safety in which to process the experience, no therapy or support structure to help cope with what you are witnessing and experiencing. Some humans dissociate, mentally checking out during particularly violent episodes and returning to awareness only when immediate danger has passed. Others become hypervigilant, their nervous systems permanently locked into fight or flight mode, exhausting their bodies even as the awareness keeps them alive. Still others simply break, their minds unable to maintain coherent responses to the situation. leaving them as empty shells that continue performing basic functions, but have lost everything that made them individuals. And yet, humans adapt even to this. The human capacity for normalization means that eventually even the constant violence becomes background noise, something you account for without actively thinking about it. You develop reflexes that move you away from fights before you consciously register they have started. You learn to identify which kinds of violence are dangerous to bystanders and which are contained within the participants. You find ways to maintain your humanity even while immersed in inhumanity, holding on to small rituals and beliefs that define you as something other than just another component of the Ork war machine. The violence never becomes acceptable, never stops being horrifying on some level, but it does become endurable, and endurance is victory of a sort, when the alternative is complete destruction of self. The psychological toll, maintaining sanity, beyond the physical dangers of Ork captivity, lies a more insidious threat. The slow erosion of psychological integrity, the gradual dissolution of everything that defined you as a civilized human being. This process begins immediately upon capture, but accelerates over time, grinding away identity and dignity and hope until what remains might technically be alive, but has lost most qualities that made them human in any meaningful sense. Fighting this deterioration, while simultaneously fighting for physical survival, creates conflicts that have no good resolution, choices between preserving body and preserving mind when resources and energy exist for neither. The initial shock of capture produces acute trauma that most humans have experienced in less extreme forms during military service or disasters. The adrenaline crash after the terror of the battle and capture, the horror of recognizing your situation, the desperate bargaining with any deity who might listen for salvation that does not come. This acute phase typically lasts days or weeks, during which humans operate in a kind of autopilot mode, their conscious minds unable to fully process the reality of their circumstances. Some humans never emerge from this phase, their psyches simply giving up and leaving them as passive recipients of whatever fate the Orks provide. Those who survive the initial shock enter a phase of adaptation that requires constant mental effort. You must learn to think differently about yourself and your place in the universe. The Imperial Creed teaches that humans are the rightful masters of the galaxy, that Xenos are inferior beings to be conquered or exterminated, that service to the Emperor gives meaning and purpose to existence. These beliefs crumble in Ork captivity, replaced by the undeniable reality that you are powerless, that the Orks are stronger and more numerous and more successful than any Imperial teaching suggested, that the Emperor's protection does not extend to you, and perhaps never did. Reconstructing a workable worldview from these shattered beliefs requires either profound faith that can persist despite all evidence to the contrary, or a complete reformulation of how you understand your existence. Humans cope with this cognitive dissonance through various psychological mechanisms, none entirely healthy, but all necessary for survival. Compartmentalization allows you to separate your current reality from your memories of your previous life, treating them as disconnected experiences that do not need to be reconciled. You were once an Imperial Guard trooper, or a civilian, or whatever you were before, and that person still exists in memory. But the person you are now is something different, something new, and the two do not have to connect. This separation protects the memories from being contaminated by present horror, but also creates a kind of dissociation where you become a spectator in your own life, performing necessary actions without fully identifying with them. Rationalization provides another defense, creating justifications for why your situation is not as bad as it could be, or why your choices to cooperate are not really collaboration. You tell yourself that helping a mech boy build weapons is just doing what is necessary to survive and not actually betrayal of humanity. You convince yourself that your intelligence work for a Runtherd is giving you valuable information that you will use to escape eventually, making your cooperation strategic rather than genuine. You reason that staying alive is an act of resistance because dead humans cannot carry information about Ork operations back to Imperial forces. These rationalizations become more elaborate over time, building structures of justification that might fool you even when they would not fool anyone else. Stockholm Syndrome develops in some captives, a psychological attachment to their captors that transforms over time into genuine affection or loyalty. This begins, innocuously enough, with recognition that not all orcs are equally dangerous, that some treat you better than others, that within the context of orc society, there are degrees of acceptable behavior. You find yourself grateful when a mech shares food scraps, or when a knob intervenes to prevent another orc from using you as entertainment. This gratitude creates positive associations with individuals who are still fundamentally your enemies, but who show you small kindnesses that stand out against the background of constant brutality. Over time, these associations can deepen into identification, where you begin to see things from the orc perspective, to understand their motivations, to excuse their violence as simply part of their nature rather than choice. Full Stockholm Syndrome results in humans who will defend their orc captors, who feel loyalty to the warband, who would refuse rescue if offered because they have internalized their place in the orc hierarchy as proper and good. Humans also form bonds with other captives, though these relationships carry their own complications. Fellow prisoners provide emotional support. People who understand what you are experiencing because they are experiencing it too, who can offer comfort and companionship in an environment that provides neither. But these bonds are fragile because any day one of you might be selected for a cookpot or a painboy experiment, or simply disappear during a raid that goes wrong. Every friendship carries the inevitability of loss, making emotional investment a calculated risk. Some humans refuse to form connections at all, maintaining isolation as a defense against the pain of watching friends die or be taken. Others forge deep bonds precisely because shared humanity is one of the few things orcs cannot completely destroy, clinging to each other as proof that they are still people and not just resources to be used and discarded. The loss of bodily autonomy accelerates psychological deterioration. Orcs do not understand or care about human concepts of personal space or consent. They grab you when they need you moved, hit you when they are annoyed, use you however they want, without considering whether you mind. This constant violation of physical boundaries erodes your sense of self as a discrete entity with rights, replacing it with the understanding that your body is not really yours anymore, that you are an object that happens to be alive rather than a person with inherent dignity. Some humans adapt by dissociating from their bodies entirely, treating physical sensations as things happening to someone else, a coping mechanism that allows survival but at the cost of connection to your own physical existence. Hygiene becomes impossible to maintain, and the degradation of cleanliness affects psychology in subtle but profound ways. Humans are conditioned to associate cleanliness with civilization, dirt and smell with degradation. When you cannot wash, when your clothes become permanent layers of filth, when you smell like the orcs and the camp, and the accumulated grime of weeks or months without proper cleaning, you stop feeling human in some fundamental way. You look at yourself and see something that resembles the Gretchen more than your fellow humans, and that visual reminder of your degradation becomes internalized, shaping how you think of yourself. Some humans give up entirely on hygiene as a lost cause. Others cling to whatever small attempts at cleanliness are possible, finding water to wash hands or face even when full bathing is impossible, maintaining this one small link to civilized behavior as an anchor point for self-concept. Time becomes strange in orc captivity because there are no normal markers of its passage. Days blend together when every day involves the same struggle for survival. Weeks and months accumulate without celebration or acknowledgement. Humans lose track of how long they have been captive, whether it has been weeks or months or years. and this temporal disorientation adds to the sense that normal reality has been left behind. Some humans try to keep track, scratching marks on walls or tying knots in scraps of cloth, maintaining a count that gives them some sense of control and continuity. Others let time become fluid, existing only in the present moment because past and future are too painful to contemplate, and the present is overwhelming enough to occupy full attention. The question of suicide arises for most humans at some point, whether they admit it or not. Death would end the suffering, would provide escape from a situation that offers no realistic hope of improvement. Orc settlements usually provide ample opportunities for self-destruction, from weapons that could be turned on oneself to heights from which fatal falls could be arranged to machinery that could crush or incinerate a human who threw themselves into it. The fact that most humans do not take these opportunities speaks to the fundamental human drive to survive even in circumstances that make survival seem pointless. But the temptation remains, a dark thought in quiet moments, a reminder that complete despair is always one decision away. Some humans establish pacts with themselves or others, promises that if things get bad enough they will act, defining thresholds of suffering that would justify escape through death. These thresholds are usually movable targets, recalibrating downward as conditions worsen, but the act of setting them provides a strange form of comfort, the knowledge that ultimate control still exists, even when all other forms of control have been stripped away. Faith plays a complex role in maintaining sanity. Some humans find that prayer to the Emperor becomes their lifeline, the one thing that connects them to their identity as imperial citizens and maintains hope that divine intervention might still arrive. They interpret every small mercy as a sign of the Emperor's protection, every survival as proof that their suffering has meaning. This faith can sustain remarkable resilience, but it also creates vulnerability when prayers seem to go unanswered, when suffering continues without divine intervention, when the gap between belief and reality becomes too wide to ignore. Other humans lose their faith entirely, unable to reconcile an all-powerful God-Emperor with a situation where they are abandoned to Xenos cruelty. They conclude that either the Emperor is not truly powerful or does not truly care, and either conclusion is heretical enough to add spiritual crisis to physical captivity. The humans who maintain the best psychological resilience are usually those who find meaning beyond simple survival. Maybe they are gathering intelligence that they hope to provide to Imperial forces if ever rescued. Maybe they are protecting weaker humans or Gretchen, finding purpose in being a guardian even when they cannot save everyone. Maybe they are maintaining a journal or record of their experiences, driven by the need to bear witness, even if no one ever reads their account. These purposes provide structure and motivation that carry humans through times when mere survival seems insufficient to justify the cost. The meaning does not have to be grand or even particularly rational, but having something that makes your continued existence matter to someone or some cause larger than yourself creates a psychological buffer against complete despair. And yet, despite all these coping mechanisms, all the psychological defenses and strategies and ways of finding meaning, the toll accumulates. Humans change in Orc captivity in ways that cannot be fully undone, even if rescue arrives. The person who eventually escapes or is rescued is not the same person who was captured, cannot be the same, because the experiences have rewritten fundamental aspects of personality and worldview. Some of these changes are positive in their own dark way, strengths forged in horror that make survivors more resilient and capable. But many are wounds that will never fully heal, scars on the psyche that remain sensitive long after the physical body has recovered. Understanding and accepting this transformation is part of what allows humans to maintain sanity in Orc captivity, the recognition that you will not come through this unchanged, but that the person you become might still be worth being, might still have value and dignity, even if they are no longer the person you once were. Other captives, the community of the damned humans, are not the only species to suffer the fate of orc captivity, though they are among the most common, due to their prevalence throughout the galaxy and tendency to establish colonies that orcs find irresistible targets. The orc camps and settlements often contain a diverse population of captives from various species, each bringing their own perspective on survival and creating a complex social ecosystem within the broader hierarchy of green-skinned dominance. Understanding this community of the damned, learning to navigate its politics and opportunities, becomes another essential skill for survival. The most numerous non-human captives in most orc settlements are the Gretchen themselves, though calling them captives overstates their unhappiness with the situation. Gretchen are bred through the same spore cycle that produces orcs, but they are genetically programmed to be subservient to their larger cousins, to accept their place in the hierarchy as natural and proper. From a human perspective, watching Gretchen grovel before orcs, who kick and abuse them constantly, is pathetic. But from the Gretchen perspective, this is simply how things work. They are small, so they serve the big. They are weak, so they defer to the strong. Trying to rebel against this order would never occur to most Gretchen, because it would violate the fundamental logic of their existence. Yet individual Gretchen have personalities and agendas that operate within the constraints of their servile status. They gossip constantly, gathering and trading information about camp politics, which orcs are rising in status and which are about to be challenged, where the best loot is hidden and who has access to it. This information network can be invaluable to humans who learn to tap into it, though trusting Gretchen requires caution because their loyalty is always to themselves first and any alliance second. A grot who provides information today might betray you tomorrow if offered a better deal by someone else. Still, some humans form working relationships with Gretchen based on mutual benefit, trading human strength and intelligence for grot knowledge and access to areas of the camp that humans cannot easily reach. Other human captives represent your most obvious community, people who share your species and presumably your interests in survival and eventual escape. But human groups in orc captivity are far from unified. Survivors come from different backgrounds: Imperial Guard from various regiments, PDF forces, civilian populations, even the occasional rogue trader or merchant crew, unlucky enough to be caught by freebooter raids. These different origins create friction, because Guard troopers often view civilians as weak. Civilians resent Guard arrogance, and everyone suspects anyone from unusual backgrounds of potential heresy or collaboration. Forming a cohesive human community requires overcoming these prejudices, while also dealing with the simple fact that scarcity makes people selfish, and survival often means another human suffers, so you do not. Leadership within the human community is contested and complicated. Military rank carries some weight, as Guard veterans have training that can help organize resistance or escape attempts, but that weight diminishes over time as the relevance of Imperial military structure fades in an environment where it provides no protection. Some humans emerge as leaders through force of personality or ability to manage relationships with the orcs, becoming intermediaries who can negotiate on behalf of the group or at least provide warning when danger approaches. These informal leaders walk a difficult line because other humans will resent anyone who seems to be collaborating too closely with the orcs, while also depending on those same people to use their position for the group's benefit. The presence of other non-human, non-orc species in captivity varies depending on the warband's area of operation and raiding history. Tau captives are rare because Tau generally prefer to die in battle rather than be taken alive, but those who are captured bring with them knowledge of technology that mechs find fascinating and a philosophy of cooperation that clashes with the brutal individualism of both orc and imperial culture. Eldar captives are extremely rare and usually do not survive long, their psychological fragility making them poorly suited for the brutality of orc captivity, though their psychic sensitivity can sometimes be exploited by weird boys who want to experiment with different forms of consciousness. Kroot mercenaries occasionally end up in orc hands when battles go poorly, and they adapt better than most species due to their own warrior culture and ability to eat virtually anything. Though their practice of consuming the dead creates tensions with human captives who still hold burial taboos sacred. The most disturbing captives are those who have been taken by orcs so long they have begun to identify with their captors entirely. These humans, sometimes called diggers when they exist in large enough numbers to form communities, have abandoned their imperial identity in favor of trying to become orcs themselves. They paint their skin green with dyes extracted from orc blood or fungus. They adopt orcish speech patterns and mannerisms. They fight among themselves to establish hierarchies that mirror orc society. Some orc clans, particularly the Blood Axes, actually employ these transformed humans as scouts or infiltrators, taking advantage of their human appearance to gain access to imperial facilities while relying on their psychological indoctrination to ensure loyalty. From the perspective of recently captured humans, Diggers represent both a possible future and a terrifying warning. The transformation from human to digger happens gradually, through years of exposure to orc culture and the slow erosion of imperial identity that captivity creates. It begins with small adoptions of orcish behavior as survival strategies, continues through the development of Stockholm Syndrome and identification with captors, and culminates in complete rejection of one's original species and culture. Some humans who become diggers are mentally broken, their transformation a form of dissociative fugue where adopting a new identity is the only way their psyches can cope with sustained trauma. Others genuinely come to believe that orc culture is superior to imperial culture, seeing in its simplicity and honesty a relief from the hypocrisy and suffering of the Imperium. These true believers are perhaps more disturbing than the broken ones, because they made a choice rather than having one forced upon them by psychological necessity. The few who resist transformation into diggers or complete despair often form tight-knit groups that function almost like resistance cells. These groups maintain imperial customs as much as possible, holding prayer services when they can gather safely, sharing memories of life before captivity to keep those memories alive, even conducting informal trials for humans accused of excessive collaboration with the orcs. These acts of cultural preservation serve important psychological functions, maintaining identity and providing structure in an environment that offers neither, but they also create risks because they make the groups visible to orcs who might find their activities either threatening or amusing, and either response usually ends badly for the humans involved. Children born in captivity represent the most tragic element of the captive community. Some human women in orc captivity become pregnant, either through relationships with other human captives or through assault by humans or even other species in the chaos of the camps. These children grow up knowing nothing but orc society, their understanding of humanity shaped entirely by the degraded circumstances of their birth. Some are killed by orcs who find them annoying or useless. Others are raised by the captive community, becoming symbols of hope or reminders of everything that has been lost. A few grow up to be diggers, without ever having a human identity to lose, raised in orc culture from birth, and thus native to it, in ways that captured adults can never be. The moral questions surrounding these children, whether they should be protected at all costs or mercy killed to spare them the suffering of their existence, create divisions within human groups that can never be fully resolved. Interspecies cooperation, when it happens, usually takes the form of information sharing or coordinated efforts to avoid the worst dangers of camp life. A Gretchen might warn humans about an orc who is in a particularly foul mood and looking for someone to beat. A human might help a Tau captive understand the illogical rules of orc society, translating orcish behavior into terms that the Tau's logical mind can process. A Kroot might share food with humans who helped protect them from particularly aggressive orcs. These small acts of mutual aid cannot overcome the fundamental competition for resources and safety that makes every sentient being in the camp simultaneously potential ally and potential threat. But they do create networks of reciprocal obligation that can be crucial for survival. The community of the damned is not really a community in any formal sense. It is a collection of individuals and small groups, all fighting for survival in an environment that offers no security and no hope of justice. But within that chaos, humans forge connections that remind them of their own humanity, that provide the emotional support necessary to maintain psychological integrity, that offer the possibility of collective resistance or escape if opportunities arise. The other captives are simultaneously competition for limited resources and the only people in the entire settlement who might understand what you are experiencing. Managing these contradictory relationships, knowing when to trust and when to guard yourself, learning who might truly help you and who will sell you out for an extra ration, becomes yet another skill that separates those who survive from those who do not. Rare cases. Humans who thrive. Among the countless thousands of humans who pass through Ork captivity, most die quickly or survive miserably until death eventually claims them. But there exists a small percentage of humans who do not merely survive, but actually prosper in the green-skinned chaos, who find in Ork society opportunities that would never have been available to them in the Imperium, who rise through the ranks of the warband until they occupy positions of genuine authority and respect. These exceptional individuals are often deeply disturbing to other humans, their success seen as evidence of collaboration or even species traitorship. But their stories reveal important truths about both Ork psychology and human adaptability. The most successful humans in Ork society are usually those who possess skills that Orks value but cannot easily replicate themselves. Bloodaxe war bosses have been known to employ human advisors who understand Imperial tactics and can interpret intelligence about enemy movements and capabilities. These humans become strategic assets, their knowledge of how Imperial forces operate, giving them value that transcends species. A human who can predict how the Astra Militarum will respond to Ork raids, who can identify weak points in Imperial defenses, who can read captured documents and maps, provides intelligence that helps the warboss plan more effective attacks. This usefulness creates a protective relationship where the human becomes invested in the warband's success, because that success ensures their continued relevance and safety. Mechboy workshops occasionally elevate particularly talented human assistants to positions of genuine authority within the technical hierarchy. A human engineer who demonstrates exceptional skill, who can solve problems that stump even experienced mechs, who can work with looted Imperial technology in ways that create synergies with Ork designs, becomes valuable enough that other Orks will defer to them on technical matters. These humans are never truly equal to the mechs themselves, but they can achieve a status approaching that of senior spanner boys, with Gretchen working under their direction, and junior mechs seeking their input on difficult projects. The personal satisfaction of skilled work, well done, combined with the respect this skill generates, can create a perverse contentment where the human begins to take pride in their role within the Ork war machine. Freebooter crews represent the greatest opportunity for humans to achieve something approaching equality with Orks, though this comes at the cost of completely abandoning any pretense of Imperial loyalty. Freebooters are piratical Orks who operate on the fringes of Ork society, hiring themselves out as mercenaries or engaging in raiding for profit, rather than the pure joy of violence that motivates most Orks. Their mercenary nature makes them pragmatic about species, willing to accept humans or other Xenos into their crews if those individuals demonstrate usefulness. A human who can navigate through asteroid fields that would confound Ork piloting, who can operate complex sensor systems that Orks find baffling, who can negotiate with other species in ways that Orks are temperamentally incapable of, becomes genuinely valuable to a freebooter captain. Over time, These human crew members sometimes achieve status within the freebooter hierarchy that would be impossible in more traditional Ork warbands. They earn shares of loot based on their contributions. They participate in crew votes about which jobs to take. They might even command small groups of Orks and Gretchen in specialized roles, though this authority is always conditional on continued demonstration of competence and the tacit approval of the captain. Some humans in this position eventually forget they were ever Imperial citizens, their identity reshaped by years or decades of service with the freebooters, until they think of themselves as pirates first and humans second. These transformed individuals are the absolute worst nightmare of Imperial authorities, because they combine human intelligence with Ork ruthlessness and have access to inside knowledge of Imperial defenses and protocols. The psychological transformation required to thrive in Ork society involves several key shifts in mindset. First, abandoning the hierarchical rigidity of Imperial society in favor of the brutal meritocracy of Ork culture. In the Imperium, your position is determined by birth, by connections, by the favor of superiors who may never recognize your talent. Among Orks, your position is determined entirely by what you can do and how well you do it. For humans, whose potential was stifled by the ossified bureaucracy of the Imperium, this pure meritocracy can be liberating despite its brutality. You rise or fall based on your actual contributions, not on political games or hereditary privilege. Second, embracing a degree of moral flexibility that would be considered heretical in Imperial context. The humans who thrive among Orks are those who can set aside qualms about who their work helps or harms, who can build weapons knowing they will be used against Imperial forces, who can assist in raids that will kill and enslave other humans. This requires either genuine moral bankruptcy or the ability to rationalize actions in ways that preserve some sense of ethical justification. Some humans tell themselves they are infiltrating the Orks from within, gathering intelligence for an eventual betrayal that will cripple the warband. Others adopt a kind of moral relativism, where all species are equally valid, and therefore there is no betrayal in helping one species over another. Still others simply embrace nihilism, concluding that nothing matters and survival is the only goal worth pursuing. Third, developing genuine affection for, or at least tolerance of, Ork company. Humans who thrive in Ork society are usually those who come to appreciate the straightforward honesty of Ork interactions. Orks do not lie or scheme in the way humans do. They tell you what they think, usually at high volume, and if they do not like you, they will attempt to physically express that dislike rather than plotting subtle revenge. For humans exhausted by the Byzantine politics of Imperial life, this directness can be refreshing. You always know where you stand with an Ork. The fact that where you stand might be about to be crushed under an Ork boot is a separate concern, but at least there are no unpleasant surprises in the form of seemingly friendly colleagues who stab you in the back politically. The most morally complex cases are humans who use their position within Ork society to help other human captives. These individuals achieve status with the Orks specifically so they can protect weaker humans, negotiating for better treatment, or diverting Ork attention away from particularly vulnerable captives. They pay for this protection through their collaboration, building weapons, and providing intelligence, and generally making the warband more effective. But they justify it by the lives they save, or at least the suffering they mitigate. Whether this calculus works out morally is a question with no clear answer, because for every human life protected, there might be 10 Imperial soldiers who die to weapons they helped build. But these individuals see themselves as doing the best they can in impossible circumstances, and their self-image as protectors rather than collaborators allows them to maintain psychological integrity that pure collaboration would destroy. The rarest and most disturbing cases are humans who adopt Ork culture so completely they seek to become Orks physically as well as psychologically. These individuals convince painboys to perform extensive body modifications, grafting orc tissue onto human frames, replacing human organs with crude orc equivalents, even attempting full blood transfusions that more often kill the human than grant them any of the benefits of orc physiology. The few who survive these procedures become something genuinely hybrid, neither fully human nor remotely orc. Their bodies a patchwork of species that function only through the War field's reality warping effects and sheer stubborn refusal to acknowledge that what they have become should not be alive. These beings occupy a unique position in orc society, treated as curiosities and sometimes as lucky charms, believed to combine the best traits of both species, even when the reality is far less impressive. For the broader human community in the camps, these successful individuals provoke complex reactions. They are simultaneously role models who demonstrate that survival and even advancement are possible, and cautionary tales about the price of that success measured in compromised morality and lost humanity. Some captives view them with envy tinged with disgust. Others see them as race traitors who deserve execution if ever imperial justice can be enforced. A few see them as heroes who use their positions to help others, even at great personal cost and risk. The truth is probably that each case is individual, each human who thrives in orc society having their own motivations and justifications that cannot be easily categorized as pure collaboration or justified adaptation. The existence of these exceptional individuals raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of loyalty and species identity. If a human can find success and even contentment in orc society, what does that say about imperial society that created conditions where orc captivity can be an improvement? If humans can genuinely come to respect and even like their orc companions, what does that say about the dehumanization that imperial propaganda uses to define xenos as inherently evil? These questions have no satisfactory answers, which is why imperial authorities prefer not to ask them, and why humans who are rescued from orc captivity after achieving high status are usually either executed as collaborators or disappeared into inquisitorial custody, where their stories will never threaten the comforting certainties of imperial doctrine. Escape and rescue. The dream of freedom. For most humans in orc captivity, escape occupies a space between impossible dream and desperate necessity. The practical obstacles are numerous and severe. Orc camps are typically located far from imperial territory, surrounded by hostile wilderness or barren wasteland that would kill an escaped human through exposure before they could reach civilization. The orcs themselves are tireless pursuers. Their enhanced biology allowing them to track and run down fleeing humans with disturbing ease. And even if escape from immediate captivity succeeds, the escaping human must somehow survive in an environment where they have no resources, no allies, and no realistic plan for reaching safety. Yet despite all these obstacles, humans continue to attempt escape because the alternative is accepting permanent captivity among the greenskins. And some fates are considered worse than the almost certain death that escape attempts bring. The most common form of escape attempt is opportunistic, taking advantage of temporary confusion or distraction to slip away. During raids, when the camp population is reduced and attention is focused on combat preparations, humans sometimes attempt to hide themselves among equipment or fade into the wilderness beyond the settlement's perimeter. During celebrations after successful battles, when orcs are drunk on fungus beer and Gretchen are running everywhere creating additional chaos, a human might attempt to steal away in the darkness. These opportunistic escapes rarely succeed because orcs may be chaotic, but they are not stupid, and they maintain enough awareness of their possessions that missing humans are usually noticed and hunts are organized within hours. More sophisticated escape plans require preparation and coordination that is difficult to achieve under constant surveillance. Small groups of humans sometimes work together over weeks or months, gathering supplies, creating crude maps from observation of the surrounding terrain, identifying the best routes away from the settlement, and the optimal timing for attempts. They steal food and water containers, fashion crude weapons from scrap metal, create disguises or camouflage that might buy them precious hours before pursuit begins. This preparation requires keeping the plan secret, not just from orcs, but from other humans who might betray the attempt in exchange for better treatment, adding layers of paranoia and risk to an already desperate endeavor. The actual execution of an escape attempt is invariably terrifying. Moving through an orc settlement trying to remain unnoticed while every sound seems loud enough to attract attention, every shadow could conceal an orc guard. Every step might be the one that triggers discovery. The moment of leaving the camp itself, crossing the invisible boundary between captivity and freedom, brings a rush of hope mixed with terror, because this is the point of no return. If you are caught now, the punishment will be severe and public, an example to discourage other captives from similar attempts. Better to commit fully and accept whatever fate waits beyond the camp's boundaries. The pursuit, when it comes, is relentless and brutal. Orcs love hunting almost as much as they love fighting, and escaped humans provide excellent sport. War bosses sometimes organize formal hunts, sending groups of boys with bikes or buggies to track the escapees, treating the whole enterprise as entertainment rather than serious security concern. For the humans being hunted, this means facing opponents who are faster, stronger, and better equipped, who can track them through terrain where humans leave obvious signs of passage, who will not stop until the hunt ends in either recapture or death. Some humans choose to fight when cornered, preferring a quick death to being dragged back to camp for punishment. Others surrender and hope that the orcs are amused enough by the attempt that they will show mercy, though this hope is usually misplaced. The few humans who successfully escape face the challenge of survival in hostile environments with minimal resources. The landscapes around orc settlements are rarely hospitable, as orcs tend to establish themselves in locations that offer strategic advantages rather than pleasant living conditions. Desert planets, ice worlds, death worlds where the local fauna is more dangerous than the orcs themselves. These are the territories escaped humans must cross while avoiding both pursuit and environmental dangers. Many die of exposure, dehydration, or starvation within days of escape. Others survive longer, only to fall prey to local predators or hostile native populations. The tiny fraction who reach anything resembling civilization find themselves facing new challenges as they try to convince imperial authorities that they are genuinely escaped captives, rather than orc spies or chaos-corrupted refugees. Imperial rescue operations of human captives from orc settlements are exceedingly rare, requiring both knowledge of where captives are being held and sufficient military assets to mount an effective raid. The Astra Militarum occasionally encounters orc camps during offensive operations and liberates any human captives found, but these are incidental rescues rather than planned extractions. Space Marine chapters sometimes conduct surgical strikes to retrieve specific high-value individuals, though their definition of high value rarely includes common soldiers or civilians. Inquisitors pursuing specific investigations might authorize raids if they believe captives possess information relevant to their work. But for the average human in orc captivity, hoping for rescue is hoping for a miracle that will almost certainly never arrive. When rescues do occur, the aftermath is often more complicated than dramatic reunions and celebrations would suggest. Humans who have survived orc captivity are regarded with suspicion by imperial authorities who question how they stayed alive when death would have been the more honorable fate. Interrogations probe for evidence of collaboration or chaos taint, assuming that anyone who endured orc captivity must have been compromised in some way. The rescued individuals themselves often struggle to reintegrate into imperial society, finding the rigid hierarchy and meaningless bureaucracy suffocating after experiencing the brutal meritocracy of Ork culture. Some openly wish they had been left in captivity, recognizing that while Ork society was violent and terrifying, it was at least honest about what it demanded. Unlike the Imperium, which wraps its cruelties in noble-sounding rhetoric. The psychological trauma of captivity, followed by rescue, creates adjustment challenges that Imperial society is poorly equipped to address. The Imperium does not have mental health support systems for soldiers who have been through traumatic experiences, operating on the assumption that faith in the Emperor should be sufficient to overcome any psychological damage. Humans who cannot simply resume their previous roles are considered weak or tainted, shuffled into menial positions, or subjected to additional interrogation to determine if their difficulties adjusting mask deeper corruption. The lucky ones find ways to cope through community with other survivors, forming informal support networks that provide what official channels refuse. The unlucky ones never truly escape their captivity, remaining psychologically imprisoned by experiences that changed them in ways they cannot articulate and that others will not understand. The dream of freedom sustains humans through captivity, even when they recognize that dream's improbability. It provides motivation to survive one more day, endure one more beating, accept one more degradation, because as long as they are alive, the possibility of freedom remains, however remote. This hope can be a source of strength, giving purpose to survival beyond simple animal reflex to avoid death. But it can also be a source of despair when reality makes clear that freedom will not come, that they will remain in Ork captivity until death or transformation into something that no longer desires escape. Managing this tension between hope and despair, maintaining enough hope to preserve will to survive while not allowing hope to become delusion that denies reality, becomes yet another psychological challenge among the many that captivity imposes. For those who do escape or get rescued and successfully reintegrate into Imperial society, they carry with them knowledge and experiences that few humans possess. They understand Ork psychology in ways that theoretical briefings cannot convey. They know the weak points in Ork logistics and command structures. They have seen the reality behind the propaganda, both about how dangerous Orks are and about how superior Imperial civilization claims to be. This knowledge makes them valuable assets if Imperial authorities can overcome their suspicion long enough to utilize it. But it also makes them dangerous because their understanding of Ork society necessarily includes understanding of the ways that Ork culture is in some respects more functional than Imperial culture, and that understanding borders on heresy in a civilization that cannot tolerate any suggestion that the Xenos might have anything worth learning from. Conclusion: the ultimate horror. There are many ways to die in the grim darkness of the far future, but dying in Ork captivity stands out for its particular combination of brutality and absurdity, horror and dark comedy, meaningless suffering, and strange moments of almost connection. To be taken by Orks is to be stripped of everything that defines you as human: your dignity, your autonomy, your place in a civilized society, your certainty that you matter in any cosmic sense. It is to be reduced to a resource, a thing that might be useful or entertaining or edible, but is never truly valued, never protected, never safe. And it is to live knowing that your continued existence depends entirely on the whims of beings who could kill you as easily as breathing, but who might also forget you exist for days at a time if something more interesting catches their attention. The psychological horror of Ork captivity lies not in the physical violence, though that is real and constant, but in the way it forces humans to recognize uncomfortable truths about themselves and their species. The vaunted superiority of mankind, drummed into every Imperial citizen from birth, reveals itself as propaganda when confronted with Orks, who are simply better at warfare than humans are. The elaborate social structures of the Imperium, with their countless ranks and titles and protocols, seem absurdly overcomplicated compared to the brutal simplicity of Orkish might makes right. The faith that sustained you through training and deployment and battle becomes harder to maintain when the Emperor's protection is conspicuously absent, and survival depends not on divine intervention, but on your own wits and willingness to compromise principles you thought were absolute. Yet humans endure even this. We endure because endurance is what humanity does, surviving in environments that should destroy us through sheer, stubborn refusal to accept that we are beaten. We adapt to Ork society because adaptation is possible, even when it requires becoming something we would once have found horrifying. We find meaning in circumstances that seem designed to strip away all meaning, creating purpose from the simple act of survival, or the chance to help a fellow captive, or the grim satisfaction of small rebellions that the Orks never notice. We hold on to our humanity even as we are forced to abandon many of the things we thought made us human, discovering that humanity is not defined by cleanliness or dignity or freedom, but by something more fundamental that persists even in the worst circumstances. The spectrum of human responses to Ork captivity spans from complete despair and early death to disturbing success and integration into Ork society, with most humans existing somewhere in the middle ground of miserable survival, punctuated by small moments of relief. There is no single correct way to endure this fate, no strategy that guarantees survival, no moral framework that clearly defines what level of cooperation with captors crosses from necessary adaptation into inexcusable collaboration. Every human in Ork captivity makes dozens of impossible choices every day, trading away pieces of themselves to purchase temporary safety or relief, never knowing whether they are preserving what matters or destroying it through compromise. For those of us who have never experienced Ork captivity, these stories serve as warnings and also as testaments to human resilience. They warn that the galaxy is vast and hostile and indifferent to human suffering, that the Emperor's protection extends only so far, and that beyond its reach, there are horrors that make the worst nightmares seem pleasant by comparison. But they also testify that humans can survive even these horrors, that we can find ways to maintain our core identity even when stripped of everything external that defines us, that we are more adaptable and stronger than we give ourselves credit for being. The final truth about Ork captivity is that it reveals both the worst and the best of human nature. The worst, our capacity for betrayal and collaboration, our willingness to sacrifice others to preserve ourselves, the ease with which we abandon principles when maintaining them becomes too costly. The best, our ability to endure impossible circumstances, our capacity to help each other even when doing so risks our own safety, the stubborn spark of hope that keeps us alive even when logic says we should give up. These contradictions cannot be resolved because they are fundamental to what we are as a species, the double-edged nature of the qualities that allowed us to dominate a galaxy in the first place. If you take nothing else from this exploration of human experience in Ork captivity, take this. We are more fragile than we pretend, but also stronger than we know. The protection of the Imperium is a blessing never to be taken for granted, because once lost, it reveals how thin the veneer of civilization really is. And yet, even stripped of that protection, cast into the most hostile circumstances imaginable, humans find ways to persist. We survive, we adapt, we remember, and in remembering, we honor those who did not survive, carrying their stories forward as testament that their suffering had meaning, even if that meaning is only the lesson they teach to those of us who come after. May the Emperor protect you, and may you never have cause to learn whether that protection extends as far as you hope it does. But if you do fall into the green tide, if you find yourself standing before beings that should not exist according to any rational understanding of biology, remember that others have stood there before you, and some of them survived. The path forward is not clear, and it is certainly not pleasant, but it exists, and as long as you continue to walk it, you are still human in the ways that matter most. Hold to that. it may be the only thing that remains truly yours. Thank you for watching this exploration of one of the grim, dark future's most overlooked horrors. If you found this video informative or thought-provoking, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the lore of Warhammer 40,000. Share it with anyone who might be interested in understanding the reality behind the Ork war machine and what it means for the humans who get caught in its gears. And as always, remember that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but within that endless war, there are still stories of human resilience worth telling and remembering. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay faithful, and pray you never have to put these lessons into practice.